Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for coming. I know it's busy getting back after a week of recess, and you'll have a lot on your plate. I can talk a little bit about Hewlett Packard. I think like all the companies represented here today, it's a brand you all recognize. I hope you see it at least a couple times a day around your office and at home. But I want to talk a little bit, as Chris said, about the process. I don't want to assume that anyone here fully understands kind of what your bosses are going to be dealing with once these agreements come up here. I assume most of you don't do trade as your full-time portfolio. You probably have a lot on your plate, so I want to just chat a little bit about that, and then maybe in the Q&A session we can answer any questions that you might have outstanding. Similar to the other companies that are here today, HP has, as you can imagine, an enormous global presence. We have about 300,000 employees worldwide. We're in over 170 countries. And we have about 700 suppliers, partnerships with suppliers around the world. And we look at that as an opportunity. As Dorothy mentioned, it certainly helps HP remain competitive, but it also really feeds into what we have long held as a philosophy of really having a responsibility to the societies where we are. And whether it's a society outside Stanford University, where we were founded in 1939, or what we do in Panama, Colombia, and Korea, we feel strongly that where we are, we need to do more than just trade and do business, as I'm sure all of the companies here today would feel the same way. We contribute strongly to the education of the society where we are. We like to think that we can actually impart some of our values, whether it's recycling products or climate change, reducing the carbon footprint. We feel like we bring a lot of that with us when we have a presence in the many countries where we are. It's funny, Dorothy mentioned a little bit about what some of these trade agreements do and what part of these agreements are really important to the technology industry. Obviously, the chapter on agriculture is not something that we're spending a lot of time focusing on, but there are a lot of chapters that don't just deal with the duties, the back and forth of the products. Jennifer's going to talk a little bit about the importance of the duties on products going into some of these countries. But a lot of it really is about the things you can't see. It's about the rules of the game. It's about the legal frameworks. And I like to joke when I worked with both Dorothy and Chris at USTR, and there was a time where the Congressional Affairs Office was kind of shifting around, and I was able to figure out what I wanted to have in my portfolio versus the new person could take on the crafty issues that I didn't want to deal with. And the issues that I took off of my plate were government procurement, intellectual property, services, and investment. Which, lo and behold, all the issues now that I have to focus on with Hewlett Packard are exactly those issues. And the reason I wasn't attracted to those issues, even when I spent time up here on the Ways and Means Committee, was because they were issues that you can't see. When you think about Hewlett Packard, you think about the products that we trade. We trade, we invent and we export and import printers and copiers and phones. The things you can see and touch, and you can look at a schedule of duties and find out, okay, well, when this FTA comes into play, the duty rate in Colombia is going to go from 10% to 3%. You can do a quick calculation and figure out how that's going to affect your bottom line. But really what these FTAs are becoming increasingly about is not so much about the duties, it's more about the rules of the game, the rules for investment, whether or not there's a dispute settlement provision in there where we can actually hold our trading partners accountable if they do break the rules. Those issues are extremely important to our companies, and I know they're important to members of Congress, because those are the questions that Chris and I would get asked constantly. We're at USTR, you're up here. Your members, your bosses want to know what happens if our trading partners break the rules? What happens if they don't do what's in the agreement? And those are important questions and things that our companies can certainly answer, the Ways and Means staff can answer, USTR can answer, because these FTAs are different. They are bringing in a permanent and reciprocal framework that we have not had with these countries otherwise. The rules on investment, government procurement. Procurement's a huge issue for HP and other companies because we sell a lot of products. We sell PCs, we sell computers to schools and government agencies all around the world. So if an FTA is going to level the playing field on procurement and allow us to sell more of our product, we're certainly going to support that because that actually holds that country accountable to making sure that they do that permanently, forever. With respect to HP's presence, just quickly I'll mention, with Korea, again, when I first came to HP, one of my first days on the job, I said, look, this Korea FTA is coming up kind of quickly. Can someone internally tell me, what do we sell to Korea, what's important, and where does it really, help at HP when I go up in the hill and talk about it? And really what it is with respect to HP, and I know it's the case with IBM, is really our partners that are actually going to get more of a boost than we are. For example, HP, one of our biggest customers is Bank of America. We do the interface on the ATMs. when you go to the ATM, that's an HP product. The financial services chapter of the Korea Free Trade Agreement is huge. It opens up all new types of market access that financial services companies didn't have, or will not have until the FTA comes into play. If Bank of America is able to increase its market access into the Korean market, that helps HP because we make products that go into making a lot of Bank of America's products. And those examples can be, I think, eliminated quite frequently. Panama and Colombia for HP are really services hubs in the region. We've chosen both of those areas, Panama in Central America and Colombia in South America, to be new services hubs. We just opened a new services center in Medellin just last year, and a lot of it's because of the reasons that Chris was talking about, the development socially and economically and politically that Colombia has made. We recognize that, and it's good for our business, and it's a society where we want to engage. And we're growing in all of these places, and we support all three of the free trade agreements coming into play, a lot of it because of what I said about the rules of the game and holding these countries accountable. And before I talk a little bit about process, I think one of the most important things that really comes from these free trade agreements, and you know, I guess I naturally go back to thinking about the kinds of questions that members and staff asked when we did our last really big trade fight was the Central America Free Trade Agreement, is, you know, members want to know, well, what happens if we don't do the FTA? That's really, you know, what happens if we just maintain the status quo, we go about our business and we go do the tax bill and whatever else has on, whatever we have on tap for the year, you know, what do we really get for the trade agreement? Some of the questions are hard to answer. You want to know exactly what it means for your district and for your state. TechAmerica's got great statistics on, I think, what these agreements will do on a state-by-state basis, which I know is helpful for your offices. District by district is a little bit harder to do, but I think the cost of doing nothing is very, very high. When you hear some of the criticisms that I know we're going to be answering over the next several months as we talk about these agreements, whether it's, you know, well, this country doesn't do enough on environment, it doesn't do enough on labor, it really should do more on X, Y, and Z issue, they're going to come out of the woodwork, believe me. I think that the answer that seemed to resonate, at least when I was working for USTR, was, well, if we don't do the free trade agreement, those issues are not just going to go away on their own. You know, engaging these countries really is the most important thing, and that's true from a company perspective or from a U.S. government perspective. If we have a solid, permanent, reciprocal partnership with a country, and we have an issue with respect to all these issues, that only helps the U.S. engage and help these countries understand the importance of improving their labor rights or improving their environmental conditions. So that's one thing that I think is very, very important to HP and I think to the United States. And with respect to the process, I just want to touch on this briefly. I know a lot of you may have experience with dealing with free trade agreements, although they don't come as often as we all would like them to come. It's always an exciting vote. Sometimes we think it's going to be an easy vote, and you know, Chris and I have been up here many a time where they're voting on what seems to be an easy agreement, like Bahrain or Australia, and you think it's going to be a quick one, and it ends up being a cliffhanger for all sorts of reasons. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that members get asked questions, or a constituent will come to them with a concern at the last minute, which happens in a lot of legislation. And it takes a while to make sure that those questions are answered. And they almost always are answered fully. It's just, it sometimes takes the vote staying open for another 10 minutes or so before you figure out that there is an answer to the question of the member that has been asked. The Ways and Means staff is phenomenal on both sides of the aisle in answering the questions that come up. USTR is a great resource, and I think that the companies and the coalitions that are built, the company coalitions that are built around these agreements also can be very, very helpful. Essentially what is taking place right now with respect to these agreements, and I invite my colleagues from the Ways and Means Committee to chime in if I get any of this incorrect, but you know, the free trade agreements themselves are not what's going to come to Capitol Hill. What's happening right now is the free trade agreement they've all been signed by the United States and our respective counterparts. USTR is drafting the legislative language that will reflect those commitments. So it's all the changes in U.S. law that have to take place, and that is what your bosses will vote on, is the actual change to U.S. law. Consultations have taken place before the agreement was negotiated, during the negotiations, and ever since then, to answer the most basic questions to the craziest question you think should have absolutely no relevance at all, but actually can actually impact a lot of votes and a lot of members' views up here. So those agreements will come up on a timeline. They've all been negotiated under before fast track negotiating authority expired, so they all will come up and they will be considered relatively quickly. I think once they come up, there's a total of 90 legislative days after the time they come up, for which time they have to be completed for them to be voted into law. And during that time, there are mock markups to try to vet issues through with the committees. I'm not sure if the term mock markup is familiar with any other legislative issue other than trade or with a fast track type vote. But that basically is just to get things through the committees and kind of vet all the issues. So once it does come up, most members' issues have been addressed and taken care of, and they can go through the committee very quickly and go to the floor for a quick up or down vote, no amendments. So I'll leave it at that, and if there's any other questions about the process, I know there's Ways and Means staff in the room. I'm happy to chat a little bit about that. If you have questions about HP or our views on the trade agreements, I can answer those as well. Thanks.